Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book on advocacy. Now there are a lot of books around on advocacy and some of them are very good for some people, not so good for others. This one I found rather interesting. We've got a fascinating title. I've done a long review on this as well. It's come from Bloomsbury Professional. It's called 365 Daily Advocacy Tips and it's been written by Leslie Cuthbert. We'll have a look at the book in a minute. What I've done is I looked at the book because I've reviewed a number of advocacy books over the years, and advocacy is a subject that's very difficult to teach. You either got it or you haven't to a certain extent, but there are tips and guides as to what sort of questions to ask and how to do things. And always remember one thing, always be prepared and make sure you don't ask one too many questions either. I've given it the review title for this book of "And for the Leap Year Tip, buy this fascinating book on advocacy hints." And that's really how I felt when I looked at it. Here's the book itself. There's the front cover, the spine, and then there's the back with a lot of stuff. I've repeated some of the quotes of what's actually here in the back of the book. But the book itself is very interesting. Leslie Cuthbert is a solicitor advocate. He's a consultant and trainer. There aren't, of course, any, there's no index of any sort because it just runs through with the pages with one tip per day, hence 365 pages. There's a foreword which has been written by Ian Morley, Queen's Counsel, who wrote The Devil's Advocate. More of him in a minute. Then you've got a preface. Socrates, I can't teach anybody anything. All I can do is make them think. A very interesting point just to start off with. That's from Leslie Cuthbert, and then there are some acknowledgements. Then we go into the contents, and then that gives you a structure for the way in which he's going about it. In case you're looking for particular things, mechanics of advocacy, psychology, cross-examination and so forth, decision-making, quotes, resources on improvement and so forth. Preparation being very important. Then there's some comments, and then tip one, the basic introduction to it. And then you run all the way through. What I did like, and you notice, it's the same with Ian Morley's book, there's plenty of space in the book to write things down. So do bear that in mind as you go through it. It's not the most difficult book to read at all. I found it fascinating. Once you actually open it up, it's one of those books quite difficult to put down because you want to go on and look at another tip. And but there again, what you have got, of course, in the contents section is a very useful structure, so that depending on what you're looking for, you may well get the tip that you are actually seeking. This is what we say anyway about the book. Yes, it's a superb little pocket book by Leslie Cuthbert entitled 365 Daily Advocacy Tips. It's published by Bloomsbury Professional, and it gives advocates, that's solicitors and barristers, in fact anybody who's actually doing cases, litigants in person for instance, across all legal fields, a very well thought out, useful and effective practical tips guide on advocacy skills needed for the 21st century, because advocacy is actually quite different from the way it used to be perceived even a few years ago because of changing views and attitudes. These special skills have been honed down then, developing over the years to suit the changes in style and judicial attitudes of the day. The book includes the impact of psychology, which I'll mention a few times. It's quite important, as any reader and an analyst of English literature will probably know, because it enables practitioners that the way one advocates is to be of relevance to current practice in 2015, with all the mistakes of the past hopefully kept behind us. And from that point, the book itself is undoubtedly a text for all advocates, from beginners just out of law school to experienced, or think they are experienced, practitioners. We felt, having read this book, that people in many walks of life, not just lawyers, can benefit from, whether in criminal, civil or other proceedings, especially with the growth of litigants in person in the legal aid for all era, that it really is something you should read because it's a daunting experience actually having to go to court. And as the author says, the tips are non-jurisdiction specific, and so they are relevant to advocates all over the world, including our rather brash colleagues in the North American continent. And I hope they don't mind me saying that, but they can appear that way sometimes. The content of the book covers a range of helpful quotes, points from psychology, which is actually towards the beginning of the book, and of course best practice points to gain the requisite brownie points with the judge. Cuthbert has included brief snippets of useful information, giving as wide a range of interesting pointers and hints as possible, which will give us all a few ideas about how to tackle some of the more hideously difficult cases. And unlike most books about advocacy, this one provides useful insight, as I say, into psychology, which is often overlooked, and it also explains how to break down the rules of argument and rhetoric, which is a good discipline to adopt early on in your practice. Other constructive observations include the coverage of acronyms to help remember techniques. It's a good training device, that one. Useful quotes from history and literature which can be used in cases. I don't bore the judge. And references to other legal texts and actually non-legal texts as well, which make the book more than just a guide for the lawyer advocate. I think politicians could find it quite helpful too. One of our contemporary expert advocates who's established as seriously good in court, and I'm sure he would be quite happy for me to describe it as that, is Ian Morley, Queen's Counsel. And he's well quoted here when he writes in favour of these tips, saying, and I'm taking the quotes from his remarks, "This book is a good idea. What I like is that there will be one idea every day and only one. Your mind will not get jumbled. Think on what you read. Some ideas you will like, others may not work for you. With advocacy, this is always the way, but the point is to try things out one day at a time. And one can see from Ian's seminal work, The Devil's Advocate, now the third edition, which is from Sweet and Maxwell and Thomson Reuters Group, such sage advice for modern practice. And I think it is important, especially when you're doing any form of advocacy, to always make sure you've got a quite clear plan of what you're doing. The advocacy advice throughout, I think, is rightly described as packed with pithy, serious, amusing and thought-provoking tips for each day of the year from a refreshingly diverse range of sources. And of course, it is the originality of the advocate that can make a profound difference to the outcome of a case. And that, I think, is something that's a little underplayed sometimes, but certainly an important thing to bear in mind. It's originality of thought, if you want to put it in a slightly different way. What we liked in particular was that the tips give a fascinating insight into the principles of good advocacy, whilst offering essential practical knowledge of related topics such as how people make decisions, indicators of credibility, and the rules of arguments and rhetoric. And unlike many advocacy guides, this one gives a refreshing insight into the world of psychology itself, which is, as I say, something I'm stressing quite strongly, and how to break down the rules of argument and rhetoric so you can succeed with your approach. It offers most suitable acronyms, as I've indicated, to help one remember techniques with useful quotes. Again, that's, as I've said before, a very useful training technique. Lengthy and studious volumes of advocacy have had their place, we think, and they don't feature much really in the teaching of advocacy today, because if you actually can teach advocacy, it is not the easiest subject to put across to some people because of the nature of the characters of the individual who are using these skills. But once taught, just a morsel of advice might be needed to change an entire day's work, and this is where it might be found, of course, in this book. Cuthbert's list is a calendar of tips and tales from the world of advocacy, and that's how it's described. It does provide an able companion for every advocate serious about continuous and incremental improvement in their knowledge, skills and practice, with the added bonus of plenty of space to jot down your own ideas throughout the book. We can give some examples taken directly from the book. without spoiling it for those readers new to advocacy. When questioning, always remember to KISS, that's keep it short and simple. In cross-examination, remember the shorthand, cross, cross. Aim to tell the witness the answer you want, rather than ask for a response, such as, you were at home, correct? Not, were you at home? You see the subtle or not so subtle difference, and never forget the correlation. That correlation does not equal causation. Some common sense points are also well explored. Don't read out the entirety of your argument. That's a standard view, certainly put forward by many trainers, and I agree with that. In other words, written down as it actually, if you've written everything down, it actually doesn't work. You've got to be able to let the thing flow. Or if you seek to memorize the totality of what you wish to convey, that again can be difficult, because that doesn't work either. I know that you get people like David Cameron memorizing a full speech and so on. Well, that's very important for certain things, but with the type of advocacy we do in the courts, the whole purpose of it is to let it flow within, of course, parameters, and that's it's common sense that does come into it. The author mentions that a common helpful approach is to remember the introduction and the last paragraph, which is a basic structural point, of course, for us all. Begin with the end in mind is a useful concept to focus upon. Other sensible guidance includes how the advocate should dress, outside formal robing of course, and how to present oneself, which can be an incredibly important factor, even in 2015 after years of sloppy dressing. And remember the nature of the judiciary, as one judge has put it, the burden of proof is on the advocate in the polyester suit. Well, an interesting point there, but of course, like everything, if you wear and dress well, you wear proper clothes and dress well, you're much more likely to be called sir or madam than if you look as though you've just come through a hedge backwards. Please don't think that there's some sort of sartorial snobbery here, because there isn't. It's just, again, it is common sense, and that's what these tips are. It's really a practicality in reality is what I've described it as. And that's really why Cuthbert's book is an exercise in reality itself and how to win in 2015. And as I said before, remember what I said about the beginning and the end? Our title at the beginning, and for the leap year tip, buy this book. And that's really my tip. There's the book again, side and then the back. As you gather, I really love the book. I thought it was like, here's some really rather good stuff on techniques. This is the anachronism side. You've got loads more. This is on cross-examination. Of course, I opened it right in the middle. Cross-examination being a favourite. There we go. One of the things I would say is that when you do advocacy, don't be afraid. One of the important things about this is you've got to have a little bit of courage when you get up and do it. And I think one of the things about this is that the tips which you read you'll probably say yes, scratch your head and say yes, I should have thought of that, or I've just thought of that. That's exactly what I would like to do. Thank you to Leslie Cuthbert anyway, and to Bloomsbury. Oh, it was a great book to read, and I really enjoyed doing the review. Thank you. Bye bye.